This story is told about a guy who was born into an ordinary family in the city of Lanwan. At this point, it was the year 2003. This man was still living in the outskirts of the city, relying only on himself alone. And this guy's name was Wei Yi, and that day he was hunting in the forest as usual. He was wearing a special hunting uniform which also had a number on it. Then suddenly Wei Yi felt some movement nearby in the bushes. He immediately concentrated. At this time, a shadow snake with a huge mouth saw his bait after all and wanted to eat it. Wei Yi was glad that the snake had finally been caught and immediately ran to attack it with his knife. The guy jumped straight at this shadow snake and cut off all of its tentacles, which had sharp teeth on them. The snake did not expect such a blow. However, it hit Wei Yi directly in the stomach with its tail. It was a strong blow, so the guy even flew back a few meters. At this moment, his friend who was holding the bait and sitting in the bushes hiding from the monster immediately became worried about Wei Yi. He asked if he needed help. But the guy replied that he had everything under control. He could not be afraid and just trust him. At that moment, he got into a fighting stance to attack the monster again. The snake, which had gained even more strength from anger and sprouted back its tentacles, began to growl at the guy. Wei Yi's friend, watching all this from the sidelines, began to support him. At this moment, the guy turned to him and said that it was time for this. This guy's name was Jue Meng, and he immediately realized what he had to do. He grabbed hard on the rope he had been holding all this time. As he did so, a huge boulder that was tied to a tree flew from the sky and hit the snake. It crushed the snake so that it couldn't even move. Wei Yi, who was lying not far away from the incident, exhaled a sigh of relief and thought that he was lucky after all. This time, he had escaped his fate. After it was over and the snake was finally dead, the guys started to pick up its body and walk towards the city. Wei Yi told his friend that the snake was not small and would need to be exchanged for resources with the peacekeeping team. However, Jue Meng said that the guy could forget about it. Although they incentivize them to hunt for shadow beasts, but they are not part of their team after all, and hunting is a risky business. The guy laughed and asked, "And where in their time is there no need to take risks?" However, the guys did not notice that someone was watching them from the bushes. They continued on into town and argued over whose carcass it would be this time. Each wanted to take the spoils for himself. The guy who was watching them, hearing their conversation, thought they were two interesting enough guys. In fact, their time is dominated by the sunless age. Mankind no longer remembers what it means to have sunlight, much less the warmth of the sun. You can only hear about the light of mushroom rain or fresh flowers from the stories of old people. Their world was shattered in the city, and instead of the usual skyscrapers, only ruins remained. Since early childhood, the people of Lanwan have heard them say that about 100 years ago, they incurred the wrath of the gods, and the gods therefore took away their sun. Soon the guys finally reached the special headquarters. There was a place where various resources were collected. When Wei Yi and his friend approached the queue, the people immediately became anxious. One of the men said that this time he had brought them food for the feast after all. He was very happy. Then the man who was sitting at the table collecting all the things from the people suddenly warned them to be quiet and not to disturb the others. However, the residents did not listen. They did not understand how he kept coming across such rare animals. Some even asked him to take them hunting with him next time. The guys who worked in the special department watching the order were very dissatisfied. One of them said that it was very unpleasant when he did not meet a single animal. He also thinks that the shadow beasts nearby are already all extinct, and since they are gone, he Laozi can't hunt normally. But then suddenly, one of the hunters noticed the argument that was going on between the men. He went to the boss and asked him to see what was going on. Wei An was talking to some guys in line. He tried to explain to them that there was nothing wrong with it, and it was just a snake. Lao Ji immediately told his boys to grab him, and when the helpers had accomplished this, he went over and took the body of the snake. He began to examine it carefully. After that, he said that if the gallbladder was intact, Mr. Sei Lin would be very happy to have it. The guys who were restraining Wei Yi and his friend began to feel indignant. They didn't understand how such kids could steal such a rarity from them. Jue Ming tried to somehow object and prove something to them, while Wei Yi himself was just trying to get out of their hands. But at that moment he was kicked in the face. The guy didn't expect it, so he couldn't group himself, and a few drops of blood flew out of his mouth. His friend immediately became worried. He yells to be let go. After all, he wanted to help Wei Yi. However, the hunters, of course, would not let them go. One of them said that what he really meant was that they were so young, and he did not understand how on earth they could have killed such a large snake. And that could only mean that they had stolen it from them. Another warrior asked if they were not afraid to die if they dared to steal a war trophy, even from a lord of the peacekeeping team. At that moment, an old woman came up to them. She was very frightened and felt sorry for the boys. She asked the soldiers to let them go because they were still children. However, the hunters came up to her and started yelling at her, telling her to be quiet and mind her own business altogether. One of the men started pointing a finger at her, saying that she only gets her supplies because they hunt shadow beasts and barter with the gods. And those two boys dared to steal their trophy, and that questioned their status as citizens. Then the warrior turned to the rest of the residents and asked if anyone else wanted to pry and stick up for those guys. People were frightened. They didn't say anything back, they just stood back and watched. Wei Yi couldn't take the accusations anymore. He began to shout at their chief and said that they had not stolen anything, for it was their prey. They had hunted it themselves. Lao Tzu took him by his clothes and said that protecting them is the same as controlling them, which means that the snake is not theirs, it belongs to the warriors. Wei Yi, these words made him even angrier. His heart suddenly began to beat very fast, and a bright fire of anger appeared in his eyes. The head of those warriors kept up with the guy. He grabbed his sword and said that he actually really disliked his eyes. And given the hatred with which he looks at him, Lao Tzu wants to make sure that he, a boy who doesn't know what is right or wrong, remembers this moment for the rest of his life. At this point, the warrior was about to cut the guy's eyes out, but then suddenly something swift swept right in front of them. Zhu Meng was really scared for his friend. He started shouting out his name. The guy didn't want anything to happen to him. But at that moment, something strange happened that the warriors could not foresee or understand. Something very fast suddenly knocked them off their feet. It was just the guy who had been watching them in the woods. He came closer to the hooligans and said that the minions of the peacekeeping team were getting more and more degraded. And after that, he asked if they were even ashamed of robbing ordinary civilians. Lao Zi ignored his words. He started yelling at the guy and asked who he was and how dare he hit him. The man quickly gathered all his strength and ran straight at the stranger, screaming that he was going to kill him. Then suddenly everything went wrong, as Lao Tzu expected. When he was already in front of the stranger and wanted to hit him, he suddenly grabbed him by the throat and began to strangle him. The man didn't expect that. But then the stranger said that he had two options. Either he would leave very quickly or he would die. Lao Zi, hearing these words, was not frightened. On the contrary, they made him even more angry. He remained silent for a while, and afterward, with a shout, he pressed the locket that hung on his chest and said that the one who would die would be him. Suddenly, some unknown kind of energy began to emerge from this violet-colored medallion. People were in shock. They did not understand what was happening. However, they were very frightened by it. Everything around them suddenly turned purple. The stranger also didn't realize what was happening. He didn't expect it to come to this. However, at this moment, their territory, the place for accepting resources, found itself in a bright purple dome. Then suddenly a creature flew down from the sky to them. The people immediately realized it was the god of darkness. They were very afraid, but they began to worship him. They praised the god of darkness, and they were all trembling with fear because they did not know what to do next. Wei Yi, who was sitting not far from all this, looked at the creature and was surprised, thinking, "Is this really the same god of darkness?" At this moment, the so-called god of darkness started scanning everything around him with his mask. Then an alert came to him that hostile behavior had been detected. The danger level was high. The system advised him to issue an alert. The god of darkness also, looking at the people, immediately saw who the citizens were, as well as their number. However, after that, without thinking long, he separated from his body. He flew straight to the place where the danger was. He hit Lao Zi in the face so that he could not hold on and flew away. The people were immediately frightened. They looked at the dark god and began to run away, shouting that it was very dangerous. Wei Yi didn't understand what was going on. He thought, is it really the god of darkness and able to distinguish good from evil? The stranger, who could hardly stand on his feet, thought, where did he come from? According to the information from the informant, they rarely come. The man realized that he urgently needed to change his plan and act in a completely different way. Then he went on the offensive against this god of darkness. The boy started throwing a few stones at him to distract his attention. The creature immediately placed his dome to dodge those stones. At that moment, the stranger ran straight at him to attack. The boy punched the god of darkness in the face, but he almost didn't even move and didn't react in any way. The stranger realized that this wouldn't end well, and that was indeed the case. The god of darkness immediately hit him so hard. However, the guy did his best to dodge it. So after a few more blows, the stranger stood still and watched this god of darkness fly into the air, activating his abilities. The man realized that these monsters were much stronger than usual at night. He'd have to think of something. The god of darkness pointed his hand, which contained a special destruction laser, at the stranger. Wei Yi, seeing this, realized that he needed to help urgently. He threw his knife at the monster. However, the one just bounced off of him, and despite a few blows, the guy was surprised. He didn't think the creature was all metal. Then the god of darkness redirected his energy straight at Wei Yi's boyfriend, who was able to dodge his beam in time. However, this was a tremendous power. The creature was notified that this citizen was in violation of the order, and an order to liquidate was transmitted. The monster ran straight at Wei Yi's boyfriend. Very frightened, he didn't expect the god of darkness to switch to him now. The boy immediately started to run away. At this point, the guy thought, this is always what happens when he starts meddling in the wrong things. Suddenly, he heard his friend's voice telling him to be careful, and he turned back. There was a huge fireball coming straight at Wei Yi from behind. The guy miraculously managed to dodge it, and that ball hit the ground and exploded. Then Jue Meng shouted to his friend to run to him. Wei Yi changed his route, and when he reached his friend, they had already run together. The guy said that the shell of the god of darkness is made of metal, and the wharf is an electromagnetic loading washer. He told his friend that they would work the old pattern. He distracts, and Jue Meng strikes. His friend said he understood and advised the boy to be careful. At that moment, they scattered in different directions to put their plan into action. The god of darkness immediately ran after Wei Yi, and he almost caught up with the guy. At this moment, the latter thought that since he had the speed advantage, he would wrap it right around him. Wei Yi continued to run onward. Soon he reached the fuel barrels. Then he took the hose and stopped, thinking it was now or never. Then he unscrewed the valve and yellow fuel poured out of the hose. The boy was sure of his plan, but he had no choice. The god of darkness, who was running right behind him, immediately noticed that there was something slippery on the floor, and at high speed, he almost fell. However, the creature managed to stop abruptly, and because of this, sparks appeared. Since it was fuel, it caught fire easily, and there was a violent explosion. The stranger, who was all battered from the fight, sat watching this explosion, thinking that surely those guys didn't survive. But at that moment, out of the blue, someone crept up behind him and swung at the guy to hit him. At this very time, Wei Yi was able to quickly run away from the explosion site. He laughed and thought that if he wasn't a genius, he would have been in the grave long ago. Suddenly the guy heard the voice of a friend. He called out to him saying that he was over there. Jue Meng had just reached the huge magnet. The god of darkness, of course, that explosion did nothing, and soon he started running after the boy again. His friend at that time came to the control panel of the magnet and was about to direct it at the monster. Wei Yi, who was running away from him, saw the magnet start to move. He thought that the moment of truth was at hand. However, at that moment, something he certainly didn't expect happened. The god of darkness activated his energy beam and broke the chain that held the magnet. And at that moment, an explosion occurred due to the strong surge of energy. Wei Yi couldn't react in time and flew back a few meters because of it. And after a while, the god of darkness approached him. He started pointing his beam at the boy again. The boy was very frightened. At that moment, he saw the beam already starting to fly out of his hand, but this was not what he had expected. Jue Meng at this time ran and stood just in front of this beam, covering his best friend with his body. Wei Yi, upon seeing this, was horrified. He shouted out his name in despair. The guy didn't think his friend would do such a thing. At this moment, the image of Jue Meng appeared in front of him. He said that there was nothing wrong with it, and they would definitely succeed next time. He looked very joyful there. Wei Yi was horrified at the loss of his best friend, who was like a brother to him. He became very angry, and then his energy suddenly began to manifest. Yellow fire appeared around the guy, and he shouted in anger all over the street. His emotions were so strong that the energy filled everything around him. Even the stranger who was dealing with Lao Zi saw this bright light. The people who had been trying to escape the monster all this time suddenly stopped. They looked behind that light and didn't understand what that glow was or what was happening at all. Wei Yi calmed down a bit at this moment. His body suddenly turned white, and he found himself without clothes. The guy began to examine himself, not realizing what had happened to him. He was engulfed in this radiance, and then suddenly he looked at the huge, brightly shining ball and saw the face of his best friend, Jue Meng. Wei Yi shouted his name a few times, due to the fact that he really missed him and didn't want the guy to end his life like this. And then he suddenly woke up. He looked around, not realizing where he was. Wei Yi was lying on a bed near a window with an unusual view. Then suddenly he heard a man's voice, and when he looked to the side, he saw some man sitting behind a chair talking. The stranger said that it appeared that he had indeed killed the anti-man, and that after death he had failed to disperse and reassembled as he usually did. There was no resurrection as such. He also said that it was simply unfathomable, and this was the first time they had ever seen something like this. Wei Yi immediately got up from the bed, grabbed the first object that was nearby, and turned to ask who he was and what this place even was. The man continued to sit at his desk, staring into the screen without turning to the guy. Then calmly told him not to be frightened, because he was safe and they were very nice people. "This man's name is Gabe, and most people just call him Old Gabe." Wei Yi, upon hearing this, was very surprised. He had never heard such a name before. But then suddenly, another man came into their room, and it was the stranger who had appeared on the battlefield then. Jip said his name was Michael, and he had saved Wei Yi and brought him to this place. Wei Yi saw a familiar face and asked if he was here too. Michael walked over to the guy and explained that he had been unconscious for 3 days. At the moment, he was in the rebel army shelter time. Wei Yi, hearing this, was very surprised. He asked if they were rebels and apostates. Michael said he saw it all with his own eyes, so he still thinks the anti-humans are gods. Wei Yi, but it didn't answer anything. The boy tried to contain his anger. Michael said that the anti-humans were the monster that enslaved humans, and they were the ones who took away their right to light. He then gave the guy a screen in his hands and told him to look, because he had killed one of them. Wei Yi looked at the screens, saw himself there, engulfed in the bright light. He was surprised and thought, Is this really him? Michael congratulated him, saying that he was the first person who had succeeded. Then he raised his voice and said that if he considered their god to be apostates, then who was he himself? Is he a cruel god-killer? Gabe walked over to them and told the two of them to calm down and for Michael to stop scaring the guy. After that, the man turned directly to Wei Yi and said that it was high time for him to know the real history of mankind. Then he began to tell the story. In fact, about 100 years ago, mankind made incredible technological progress. People began modifying their genetic code to become much smarter and healthier, and to live as long as possible. Then they began to build new ecosystems in space to expand their living space for themselves. To continue their exploration of space, humans needed a more efficient source of energy, so they tapped into the sun's nuclear energy. And at one point, they even found the path to eternal life. Access to spaceflight became almost universal. And given that humans had infinite energy and time, they decided they could afford the challenge of colonizing new galaxies. And after that, a deity descended upon the earth. That day even became known as the Day of Divine Retribution. But this deity did not bring them his technology or any discoveries, but it destroyed what mankind had achieved. It corrected their genetic code to the original version, so that their lifespan returned to the original. And then this same deity deprived them of sunlight, leaving the so-called anti-humans on Earth on top of that. At first, for about the first 30 years after the disappearance of the light, the anti-humans helped the deity look after the humans. But then something happened, and they began to enslave and exterminate people. Many people began to think that something was broken in them. Wei Yi was very surprised when he heard about the anti-humans. In fact, he had never known such a thing before. Some people began to resist the new order, and this resulted in the first war of humans against anti-humans. Obviously, unfortunately, they were defeated. The anti-humans began to restrict the right of people to have children and hindered their development in general. From that very time, people have taken to calling this era the Age of Darkness. Man, in fact, is a creature that can easily adapt. However, they did not stop clinging to their lives. The anti-humans quickly realized that they could destroy human civilization through the destruction of culture. They wanted people to just forget their history and who they were before everything that had happened. Wei Yi couldn't believe that it was really true. However, Gabe seriously said that there was no way they would accept such a fate. Although they are like insects compared to the anti-humans, and hope is elusive, they are determined to keep fighting for the light. Michael also supported the man and said that they want to deprive them of everything that is important to them. However, the anti-humans will not succeed. However, most people have certainly gotten used to this life of darkness over so many years. And many people don't even remember what the world was like before the anti-humans came along. They have lost much of the cultural heritage of the past. Thus, mankind is heading straight to its doom. But someone has to take control of the situation and prevent this from happening. At that moment, someone knocked on their room and a man came in. He turned to the commander and said that lunch was ready. There were 2 plates with different food in his hands. Michael turned to Wei Yi and said that actually he could be grateful to the anti-humans. In fact, they had made him famous. To put it in terms of the past era, he had become an internet star. Then Michael took the plate and threw it straight into the boy's hands, saying that he had slept a long time. So he needed to eat a little and get his strength back. Wei Yi took the jar he was given. It was canned food. When he opened it, he saw the flavorful food, and he immediately had an appetite. The guy took the bamboo chopsticks and started tasting. As soon as the first piece was eaten, he shouted that it was insanely delicious. He then quickly began to eat the contents of the canned food and asked what it was and why it had such an incredible flavor. Michael laughed and said that they were actually canned fish. The technology was primitive. However, the raw materials for making them died out over 100 years ago. Wei Yi heard this and was very surprised and asked how it could die out. Then he felt sick and burped up all that he had eaten. Then all of a sudden their sirens started blaring, and they were very surprised, not realizing why it was suddenly the alarm going off. At that moment, they suddenly heard a large explosion right in front of them, blowing up the front door. Mike was very indignant. He said they must have been exposed after all, and asked if anyone had been hit by shrapnel. Wei Yi covered his face with his hands in order not to hurt himself, and asked what was even going on. Gabe, who was covered in blood from his wounds, said that apparently the anti-humans and the peacekeeping squad needed him. The boy covered himself with his hand so as not to swallow the smoke from the explosion. He was very surprised at this assumption. They had to get out because the fire was spreading throughout the room. Mike immediately ran over to Gabe and grabbed him on his shoulders to carry him out of the room. The man started to resist and told him not to waste his time and energy on him. Most importantly, he should take the guy away through the secret passage, but Mike insisted on his own. He said he would never leave him. When they got to the door and saw that it was also all on fire, the men realized that the main entrance had also been breached. At this moment, a girl walked into their secret headquarters along with the rest of her aides. This girl was Selena. She was the junior commander of the peacekeeping squad. She told her helpers to go forth and let them earn the favor of the gods of darkness by shedding the blood of the apostates. The men immediately went straight into that fire, but the girl warned them not to hit their light-bearer in any way. Wei Yi was very surprised when he heard them talking. He thought that they must be talking about me, and that to the authorities, he had become an apostate. Mike recognized Selena's voice immediately. He disliked her very much. At that moment, the guy realized that she had finally lost her mind. At this moment, he drew his weapon and thought that in this case, they wouldn't be ceremonious either. This weapon was very powerful. He moved closer to the door and aimed at it. Then he fired his laser straight at it. And at that moment, those warriors who were standing outside the door were immediately blinded by that huge and bright laser. Selena immediately recognized whose work it was. She turned to the boy, calling him her angel, and told him that this time she wouldn't let him fly away. She then grabbed her whip, which was charged with electricity and had a claw on the end of it. The girl pointed it straight at Mike, for the claw grabbed his head and ripped it off. The guy wasn't going to back down. He grabbed his weapon and pointed it straight at the girl. However, Selena was not confused. At first, she was of course scared. However, after that, she activated her protective shield so no beam would come through. Mike, seeing this, was very surprised. He didn't know that the girl would have an anti-human protective shell. Selene looked at him at this point and said, smiling wickedly, that nothing was as arousing as the death-defying attempts of Game to fight for life. However, at that moment something strange happened, something the girl certainly did not expect. 2 more fire beams flew into her protective shield, but they were yellow in color. It was Gabe, who grabbed 2 guns with his last strength and pointed them at the girl. Then he turned to Michael and told him to listen to his orders. He asked the guy to get Wei Yi out of this place as soon as possible, for in this world of impenetrable darkness, perhaps he was their only ray of hope. The man asked as the boy did whatever he had to do. Michael stared at Gabe for a while, feeling sorry for the old man because they'd been together so long. However, he realized that he could not wait any longer. He grabbed the boy's hand and told him that the order would be carried out. And after that, with tears in his eyes, he ran. Wei Yi, while running away, saw a man. He said that as the last survivor of the first generation of the rebel army, he had always suffered from not being able to bring light back to the people. However, on that day, he would die with the thought that he would do so in defense of the future light. The deity showed them that darkness leads only to destruction, and the only way to end this era of darkness is to show the light of their repentance, so that it will definitely be seen. Gabe's last words were for them to go to the Valley of the 5 Pines. At this very time, a horror was taking place in the city of Anwan. The warriors gathered the people all together so that no one else would try to escape. A girl with a small child on her knees begged her lord to ask the god of darkness to save her child. She was even willing to go to work in the most dangerous mine in the Valley of 5 Pines. However, the senior commander of the peacekeeping squad, a man named Balsa, just stared coldly at the girl. His aide went to the commander and said the genome was not registered and the birth of the child was illegal. The girl grasped Balsa's leg and again began to beg the Lord to spare her son. At this point, the commander said in a cold voice for them to act according to protocol. As the deputy drew his weapon and started yelling, saying that no citizen of darkness was allowed to break the law, and anyone who covers for the god of apostates and light-bearers will suffer the same fate as mere trespassers. At that moment, he shot the girl right in the head. The people were terrified. They were now afraid to even move, and the girl fell breathless to the floor, as did her son. Mike and Wei Yi were under cover. They stood somewhere deep in the crowd and watched the whole thing. The guy saw this picture and felt so pitiful that his veins even protruded. Michael grabbed him by the shoulder and told the guy to calm down, because the most important thing at the moment was to get him to safety. Wei Yi, watching the commander, he didn't understand what on earth Barca was doing in his city. Was it really that serious? At this time, there were quite a few people in the alleys of Anwan City. Someone was beating someone and threatening them at the same time. Other citizens questioned about the child, not understanding who could have done this to him. Some people found a piece of meat that was almost mold-free, so they were going to eat it. Suddenly, some man, looking away, spoke the name of the light-bearer. Wei Yi turned to the side to see who was calling him. However, he continued to cover his face with his hood. And looking around, he saw some man talking to another man. He said he saw the whole thing happen. That guy really did take down the anti-human and the guys from the peacekeeping squad in a cool, almost effortless way. His interlocutor, smoking a cigarette, said that he had actually heard that anti-humans really disliked light, which meant that the kid didn't have long to live after all. Then the children suddenly ran down the alley. One of the boys was wearing a mask with Wei Yi's face on it, and the other tried to take it away from him, for he also wanted to wear the mask of a hero. Then the kid suddenly stopped and started shouting to the whole street for everyone to look at him, because he is a light-bearer and will destroy everyone. But at that moment a man came up to him and took off his mask, telling him not to do it again, because the authorities might see him. The guy felt ashamed and said he would not do it again. Michael turned to Wei Yi without turning around and said that what people really need in this world of hopeless darkness is a small drop of hope, and only it gives them the strength to live on in such a hell, and now that very hope for all mankind was Wei Yi defeating the anti-human. They suddenly climbed a high mountain and began to look over the entire city from there. Michael said that before this poor world could be saved, the fight would take many of them away. Old Gabe, maybe even himself at this point. He picked up his glasses from the floor and held them out to the guy, saying that she'd already taken his friend away too. Wei Yi took those glasses to his hands. They trembled because he remembered what happened to Jue Meng, the way he had saved him. Then he squeezed them tighter and got very angry, and then, saying each word slowly, he said that he had to save the world. Soon they passed quite a few more different places. Then they suddenly stopped in front of a tent. Wei Yi wondered what kind of place it was. Michael pulled back the curtain and said that this place was called the Black Market. After that, he invited the boy inside. Soon, as they entered this black market, Michael grabbed some man and slammed him against the wall. The man didn't react much to that. He said hello to Michael and told him that he was glad to see him too, and he was glad that he had managed to survive the encounter with the anti-human after all. Michael continued to hold it up and said that it was really all thanks to his ironclad intelligence. This guy's name was Leal. He was a secret agent of the black market. Leal smiled and said that as far as he understood, he had managed to save the already notorious light-bearer. He also added that he would give Michael some free advice and told him to stay as far away from the light-bearer as possible. It would be much safer that way. Michael slammed his fist into his palm and said he didn't need his advice at all. The guy was really scared that he was about to get beaten up, so he started to calm the man down and told him not to hit him yet. Michael looked at the black market agent carefully and told him to tell him how many members of the peacekeeping squad were in Anwang. Leal became much calmer and, scratching his ear, replied that actually he should know better than he did. Then Michael couldn't take it anymore. He stabbed the guy in the back and told him that he was going to ask him one last time affectionately. Then it would be much worse. The agent was very surprised. He started stroking the impact site and wondered if he had lost his mind while he was walking around with that light bearer. However, he then said that no matter how many there were, they were all in this place to fulfill the same order. Michael was about to leave him and walk away, but suddenly became interested and asked the guy, "What kind of order is that?" Of course, the order was quite important and obvious. All members of the peacekeeping squad were to capture the light bearer, and in order to surround the two of them, they even summoned forces from neighboring cities, and the general staff sent a man from the capital to the city. Michael, hearing this, said that it now made sense to him what Balsa was doing in town. Leal was genuinely surprised when he heard about it. He asked Michael if he was sure that one of the organization's top fighters had already arrived. He said in a frightened voice that some even say that he once almost killed an anti-man himself. Michael replied that it was really all a matter of the distant past. But the guy still didn't understand why he had ended up siding with the anti-humans anyway. Then Leal winked at the guy and said that apparently they were really screwed. But since that was the case, he could help them for free. Then he asked, "What can help the two of them? What do they want?" Michael thought for a while, and then asked if he could get 2 ID tokens. Leal immediately took those golden tickets out of his pocket and said that he couldn't deny dying people their last request, after all. At this very time, Wei Yi was walking by himself in the marketplace. He passed by people asking for something from one of the men. There was even a snake twisting around the neck of one of the passers-by. Many were discussing buying and selling items, and some were even trying to haggle to get themselves a lower price. While squeezing in between people, Wei Yi accidentally touched a man fully clothed in a black cloak. The man immediately touched the place where he had touched and apologized for it. At that moment, some scary grandmother turned to him. She started talking about death, love, fate, and wealth, and asked him if he wanted her to read his fortune. Wei Yi was very frightened when he saw her. He immediately started to run away and thanked her, saying that he certainly didn't need it. However, at that moment, some man suddenly turned to him and said that it was the light bearer himself who had come to them in the black market. Wei Yi realized that while he was running, his hood had come off. He immediately put it back on so that other people wouldn't notice, but it was too late as they began to look at his face. But at that moment, Leal came up to him, put his arm around him, and told him that he didn't have to be afraid, because there are a lot of strange people in this market, and nobody cares who you are. Wei Yi was very surprised at first. He was about to leave, but when he saw Michael beside him, he calmed down a little. Some strange people began to pass by them. Some were carrying in a box, and some were riding an unknown animal. Soon Leal gave the boy a uniform, correcting it, said that everything was ready, and in such a form even in the coffin is not ashamed to lie down. Michael was very angry when he heard those words. He started yelling at the boy again, telling him to stop or he would jinx him. Wei Yi didn't pay attention to their arguments. He was happy with his new form, as he was now a second-level citizen. But then the salesman said his badge was fresh. He had taken it off a warm corpse just before they arrived. Wei Yi was not very happy when he heard this. But suddenly they heard some sort of shout. It was one of the warriors. He told his partners that he had found them and pointed in their direction. The boys were very frightened. They could not run away because they were surrounded on all sides by warriors who pointed their weapons at them. When Wei Yi was about to say something to Michael, he was suddenly hit by someone and fell to the floor. Because of that, he couldn't even move. He soon gathered his strength and looked at whoever it was. It was a huge man, and he called them idiots. The thug, rubbing his arm from the hard blow, said that they could watch what happens to those who went against the gods of darkness. Wei Yi didn't answer anything to that. He spat out the blood from his mouth and just stared angrily at the warriors. But the bulky man then activated his powers and looked at the guy and said that he owed him just the right amount of thanks. And if their meeting hadn't happened, the god of darkness would never have bestowed such power upon him. Wei Yi started to wipe the blood from his face and asked in surprise, was he really happy that people had turned him into a monster? The man was very angry about this. He swung his fist at him and asked him if he could not shut up, even in the face of death. In the same second, however, his hand stopped, a pink-colored whip engulfing his wrist. It was Celine. She asked the guy what he was doing that, since the senior commander of the Lightbearer needed the Lightbearer unharmed. Then she released the man and walked over to Mike, telling him that here they were meeting again. Last time he'd almost hit her in the heart. She moved closer to him, and showing him her wound said he'd missed just a little. Apparently old Gabe couldn't even teach them how to hit a target. Because Mike had been stricken by the titillation, he started yelling at the girl and told her not to dare insult his memory. Selena ran her hand over his face and said he was so scary. She prepared to repeat herself and said that old Gabe was worthless scum just like himself. The girl moved closer to his ear and said that their entire rebel army was made up of them, scum who could do nothing. However, at that moment, something unforeseen happened. A woman's voice sounded and said loudly. The stranger was on a motorcycle. The girl drove closer to them, shoving some of the warriors so that they flew back a few meters. After such a spectacular appearance, she looked straight at the Universe and asked who she was to talk about the strength of their army. Universe immediately recognized this girl. She said Jean's name in surprise, and the man at that moment activated his powers again and said, "Here comes another idiot for her death." The girl said there was too much noise in the place, and looked at the man, and asked if he was the one who smelled so bad. The warrior wasn't going to wait any longer. He came closer to her and swung at her again, saying that he was going to mince her to death. However, the girl pulled out her weapon. It was an axe, and immediately ran to attack him. And then as the warrior was about to strike, the girl wasn't there. She ran past him and stood behind him. The man at this point began to scream loudly. He hadn't noticed that his arm was gone until then. The girl didn't react to it, because she had torn off his iron hand, which contained all his abilities. Wei Yi, who had been watching their massacre all this time, was very happy with the result. He thought that she was a very good fighter, and her speed wasn't small either. However, of course, he didn't understand who she was. Leal at this moment said that her name was Jean Gay, and the girl had not been awarded 3 stars for nothing after all. Wei Yi began to scrutinize the girl with his gaze and thought about her name. Mike got angry at the girl at this point and asked if she couldn't have come a little bit sooner and they would have just all been killed. However, Jean looked at the guy and said that only she could offend him, and she certainly wouldn't let anyone else do it. Wei Yi still didn't understand what was going on. He couldn't believe that Mike and the girl knew each other. Celine at this point moved farther away from them, then turned to the warriors, calling them her sweeties, and told them to grab for a chance to distinguish themselves. She then pointed to the so-called intruders and ordered the soldiers to capture them. The man who had lost his arm approached Celine and asked for help. The girl approached him, and then she used her earpiece to call the senior commander. Selena said that the situation had changed dramatically. However, the commander did not answer her. He just hung up the phone. At the same second, Balsa himself walked into their black market. He asked them what had happened that they could not manage. And when he saw the Lightbearer and the jersey, he said cheerfully that they were his old friends after all. When Jean saw the man, she was happy too. She turned to him and said that she had finally waited for him. And at that moment, the girl hit the ground so hard that Balsa flew high into the air. He had no control over anything. However, it soon landed on the ground again, emitting a heavy rumbling sound. After that, he looked at the girl and said that she hadn't changed after all and was still as spunky as ever. Jean started to walk up to him and said that actually, unlike some people, she doesn't cheat on herself. Balsa began to scrutinize each of his opponents. Afterwards, he said that they had matured a lot, grown big and strong. However, of course, he was not going to praise them. So he added at the end that they were not developed and strong enough after all. Jean was serious, so she looked her opponent in the eye and said that they would still see how he sang when she laid him on his shoulder blades. As Michael joined their conversation, he started yelling at Balsa, saying it was his time to pay his bills. The man looked completely calm. He asked in surprise, "Do they really think they can stand up to him? A warrior with such strength and agility?" Jean wasn't going to talk to him for a long time, so she said that fortunately all of this could be easily verified. Then the girl turned to the Lightbearer, telling him to stay with her and not to go anywhere. Balsa smiled at the girl and said that what he actually liked most about her was that confidence. Then he jogged past her distractedly, and before long, Their opponent grabbed the light-bearer by the shirt and then pushed him hard aside. It was such force, as if he were throwing a ball rather than a man. And as he flew through the air, there was no way he could understand how he could even do all this, bypass Jean and then throw him so hard afterward. And at that moment, the guy's legs and arms began to be bound. It was, of course, the pink whip that belonged to Selena. The girl, by then, had already climbed into her ship. She shouted out, "Way, and make it stop spinning already. If she drops it, she'll be skinned." The guy, of course, continued to resist, and he asked that Selena just get behind him and not touch him. Michael, who was standing below, wanted to help the boy somehow, but he didn't know how, because he was too high up. Jean at this moment immediately ran over to her motorcycle, got on it, and just when she already wanted to start up and ride, she was suddenly blocked. It was Balsa. He asked the girl where she was going. They hadn't actually said anything yet. The girl started her motorcycle at the same second and told him to get off her bike. Then she started doing some tricks on it. Balsa wasn't going to take it anymore, and so when the girl got the bike high enough, he stopped it with one hand. The man asked Jean, "Is it really polite to act like this with old friends? It's disrespectful, isn't it?" But the girl stomped her foot hard on the ground and said that she had already told him to just leave her alone. At that moment, she snatched her bike out of his hand. Balsa became even more angry at these words. He shouted at the girl and said that she was insensitive to other people. Jean looked very serious. She looked him straight in the eyes and told him that he really just didn't deserve her feelings. Balsa wasn't going to talk to her anymore. He swung his foot at the girl. However, at this moment, Jean wasn't sitting idle either. The girl jumped off her motorcycle, which she accelerated very hard. She had her weapon in her hands, and at that second, a huge motorcycle flew towards us, which even started spinning because of the intense tension. But the man was able to react in time. He put his weapon under the motorcycle and split it in half. However, at that moment, Jean ran at him and tried to hit him with an axe. He blocked her blows as well. Balsa struggled, but he was still on his feet. The asphalt beneath him even split into small pieces. The girl turned around at the same moment and jumped backwards away from him so he wouldn't attack her. Balsa looked at her carefully and said that actually he was already warmed up, and further pity she wasn't going to be. Jean was a little startled. She didn't know if he was just trying to show off or if he had only been working at half strength before. However, at this moment, while she was thinking of her own, Balsa wasted no time. He ran straight at the girl. They found themselves in a battle where there was no mercy. They were fighting for life or death. Michael turned to the redhead at this point and said that there was a mission for him. He had to save Wei Yi. The guy was really scared. He was actually wounded in the shoulder, but he went anyway. But, of course, not to save the light-bearer. While Michael was distracted, the guy ran away. And when Michael turned around and saw the empty seat, it really pissed him off. He thought it was surely another setup from an idiot. At this very time, Jean tried to catch her opponent and strike him with her sword. However, she was unable to do so because he was quite fast. Balsa, seeing her efforts, said that her speed was pretty good. However, she hits like a girl. At that moment, the girl suddenly stopped, landing not far from him. Balsa didn't understand what she was doing. However, it made him very curious, for the girl had stopped completely and was not attacking. Jean had actually practiced without sparing herself, just for this moment. She was ready to go on the attack already, but Balsa, seeing that she was not paying any attention to him, came up and hit her straight in the stomach. Afterwards, he told her not to waste her attention during the fight. The girl flew to the other half of the black market because of this blow. It was then that she noticed that there was a real gulf between them. Jean didn't know if she would be able to defeat him in any way. At this moment, Jean remembered a passage from her past. Some old woman was fighting an anti-human and said that the most important thing was to soberly evaluate your chances against your opponent. She needs to learn not to start something she can't finish. However, if she does start something, don't let her stop halfway through. And in the same second, in front of the girl's eyes, everything exploded. The woman was fighting with the anti-man, and he summoned his powers and killed the two of them. Jean, present tense, was now beginning to have doubts. She didn't know if it would be better to retreat right now so that she wouldn't fail later. At that moment, the girl grabbed her weapon harder. She had already decided what she was going to do, so she went on the offensive. When Jean had already run up to her opponent, she struck her axe against his arm. At this moment, many different sparks flew out. However, that axe then flew off to the side. The girl realized that she urgently needed to dodge to avoid being hit by the hot hand. She ran in the direction where the axe flew to avoid being disarmed. Before long, Jean grabbed her axe. Balsa, watching this, was shocked. He didn't expect the girl to do exactly that. The guy was already getting nervous. And in the same second, with the help of her abilities, the girl attacked her enemy in completely different places. Balsa saw that blood had begun to flow from these cuts. He immediately put his hand to the wound. Then he turned to the girl and asked her if she thought that one successful attack would be enough to win. Jean looked at him and said that in fact it was absolutely enough to slow him down. Wei Yi at this moment continued to resist from Selina's whip. However, he was not doing well. Selina, who was completely calm, reacted to this and turned to the baby and asked that he save his strength. After all, she still has plans for him. At that moment, however, the pilot turned to her and said, addressing the junior commander, that someone had cast a fog. In fact, everything around was in a fog. Because of this, people couldn't see anything. And at this moment, feeling his leg suddenly free, someone's beam from the weapon pierced the rope and he was now free. And then the guy started falling straight down. He thought he was going to crash, but he landed on something soft. That's why he was surprised. It was, of course, Leal. He turned to Michael and asked him how he liked the fog. He knows because he loves it. He's the guy who put the mattress in the fog to keep their light carrier from crashing. At that moment, Balsa received a notice from his warriors. They said they had lost the light bearer, and his fight with the girl was still going on. Jean took advantage of the moment. She kicked him right in the face and told him not to spread his attention during the fight. Balsa could barely stay on his feet. This made him even more angry. Therefore, the guy was not going to retreat. He wanted to fight to the very end, so he went straight for the girl. Jean just stood there and watched the whole thing. However, at this moment, he suddenly disappeared as if he had vanished. The girl watched all this for a while. This situation made her angry because she was already thinking of killing him. But he just vanished. Jean realized that something would have to happen soon. He wouldn't back down so easily. That was really the way it was. Most unexpectedly for the girl, a second behind her back, Balchi appeared and hit her so hard that she flew aside and even hit the ground a few times. The girl was already starting to look around to see who it was, and she let her guard down again, so she didn't notice when her opponent appeared behind her. Bals, coming at her from behind, put his arms around her neck and started strangling her. He said it was over, just like with her mommy. He then began whispering in her ear to tell her not to be afraid, for the pain would soon be over and the anxiety would be gone forever. Jean gradually began to suffocate. She was getting worse and her head began to spin from lack of oxygen. And then, when the deed was almost done, Balsa suddenly felt a severe pain in his back, as if his huge paw had been scratched. However, it wasn't just a feeling. It was real. The huge snow beast scratched his entire back with its claws. Balsa, trying to figure out what was going on, started writhing around. At that moment, she let go of her opponent. Wei Yi, who had been on the beast all this time, grabbed the girl's hand and sat her down beside him. He turned to the opponents and told them to get acquainted, for it was generally a black market favorite, a shadowy beast of the ferocious rank. It was indeed a dusky tiger. He looked quite formidable. He had 3 pairs of eyes and huge fangs. Wei Yi was holding the rest of Selina's whip. Then he turned to the market worker and said that apparently his beast had impressed them after all. Leal smiled happily and said that of course it was expected. After all, this handsome man had never left anyone indifferent. Thereupon the lad seized the girl and got off the animal. Then he threw the whip towards Balsa and, addressing the animal, told it to catch him. The dusky tiger immediately sharpened its teeth and began to growl, glaring in the man's direction. Balsa, of course, was very frightened, but he tried not to show it and stood still, waiting for his fate. The tiger didn't wait long. He ran to attack the guy, but Balsa managed to react in time and jumped the place where he would have been attacked. When the guy threw his punch, he hit the tiger right on the head. They had a strong fight. Each got what he deserved. Soon, the dusky tiger was very close to his opponent. He had already opened his mouth to eat him, but Balsa grabbed him by the fangs and prevented him from getting closer. At that moment, many different tongues that were more like tentacles began to emerge from the animal's mouth. And then suddenly, in the place where Balsa had stood just a short while ago, the anti-human was already there. He appeared with the help of his powers when he killed the tiger. The creature held his head in its hands, showing its power. Everyone who saw this was very frightened. Of course, it was Leal who was most offended. He even cried and said that his handsome boy had been killed in a second. Wei Yi looked at his opponent and realized that an anti-human had appeared. He wasn't very happy about it, because he didn't know if he would be able to kill him this time. At that moment, the anti-human began to activate his abilities in order to summon someone. Michael said that losing a tiger is half the battle. All shadow beasts of fierce rank and above possess a core of darkness. He went on the attack and said that there was no way he could be given time to absorb the energy from the darkness core, or else he would become invincible. At this moment, through the purple light that was confusing him, he ran straight at the anti-human. The creature was notified that a light bearer had been detected. The danger level was extremely high. Therefore, it had to be eliminated. Michael had already run up fast enough to strike, and when he swung, nothing happened. It was because the anti-human was so fast that he swept through the man and ended up right in front of Wei Yi. The guy was surprised. He couldn't get used to how fast they were. Then he heard Michael's voice telling the guy to run away as soon as possible. Wei Yi, when he looked up, saw that the anti-human was about to take him and wondered how he could escape. But suddenly, he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. When he turned to the side, he saw that it was Jean. This surprised him, as the girl had just been in a semi-fainting state. Jean shoved the guy aside with one hand and kicked the anti-human straight into his iron face with her foot. It was such a hard blow that the creature flew a few meters and crashed into the wall, getting stuck there. Then Jean, who was still in the air for a few seconds, landed on the ground. She was on alert, for the creature could attack her at any moment. Wei Yi, watching the girl's actions, was shocked by this strength. He now realized that there were people who were capable of kicking an anti-human into the wall. At this moment, the girl got to her feet. She turned to Wei Yi and told him to listen to her carefully. She already had a weapon in her hands. Jean glanced at the boy and told him to stop getting in the way. Better yet, hide in a secluded place. Wei Yi, this really angered Wei Yi, because she was talking to him like a small child. For a while, he just stood there and watched her actions. Jean decided to waste no time, as the anti-human had already managed to get out of the wall and was running straight at them. She went on the attack. That's when Leal ran up to the boy. He grabbed his arm and told him that the girl was right. They should run away. She was capable of standing up for herself, but they weren't. Jean was swinging her swords at this moment, trying to hit the anti-human. It was once again a very fast fight, as the two of them were moving together, so it was impossible to tell who had the advantage. And now that the anti-human had assumed a comfortable position for the girl, Jean thought that now he would taste her crowning action. She grabbed her axe harder. Soon the girl found a special button there and pressed it. Someone suddenly heard Mike's voice behind him, who grabbed his weapon and started hitting straight at the monster. He was hitting for old Gabe and for Jue Meng. He hit his beam straight into the anti-human and a few more times after that. Jean was using her special technique at this moment, namely the execution of the Red Typhoon. After some more battle and resistance, the anti-human could no longer move. His body was engulfed by many discharges and lightning bolts. Jean then realized it was time to retreat. She ran up to Mike, and while the monster exploded, they walked backward in a calm gait. Wei Yi, who was nearby watching, was shocked. He had never seen anything like this before, and what surprised him the most was that humans could kill anti-humans after all. But at that moment, Leal looked up and noticed something strange. It was drops of purple fire. He swore and said that the resurrection had started almost instantly after all. Wei Yi was very surprised when he heard these words. He immediately looked to the side and saw the image of an anti-human begin to appear out of the smoke. He was very surprised that indeed he was being resurrected. The boy became very alarmed. He asked why the anti-human was suddenly back to its original state. They hadn't killed him yet. With each passing second, the creature took on its former appearance and even grew stronger. Michael, touching his sore shoulder, said that that was the difficulty with the anti-humans. They couldn't be killed permanently. However, Wei Yi only managed to get rid of the creature for good. The boy was very surprised when he heard these words. But at that moment, something strange happened. Some particles of light began to fly from the sky straight into their arena. Then there was a big explosion. However, there were no waves, so no one was hurt and everyone stayed where they were. 4 more anti-humans appeared out of the huge, bright purple-colored fog, who had just arrived to complete the mission. Leal was very frightened when he saw this. He didn't understand how there could be 4 of them since one was too many. The anti-humans retreated to their opponents on all sides, so they had nowhere to run. Then every last one of them received one notice to destroy the target. The creatures pointed their hands, which had beams in them, straight at their target to fulfill the order. Lazarus came closer and closer. Then Michael shouted for everyone to scatter, and they did run in different directions to avoid being hit. When they had run a fairly short distance away, there was a violent explosion due to the beams making contact. Michael was covering Wei Yi with his body, for he was very valuable. When the explosion passed, he told the boy that so far they had been lucky and hadn't gotten hit. Leal, who was sitting on the sidelines crying, said that he was only 20 years old, had never even had a girlfriend, and that he would probably die that day without ever having seen anything in his life. Michael gave him an annoyed look and said that would only happen if he didn't stop whining and pull himself together. At this moment, Jeanne, who was also waiting out the blow, grabbed her weapon, turned to the monsters, and told them to follow her. The girl made a lot of noise to attract attention. Some of the antiludes immediately heard this and ran straight after her. The girl had to make a lot of effort to escape, for they were quite fast. Michael realized at that moment that they would not escape this battle, and it would probably be their last. But they still had to protect the light-bearer at all costs. The man then turned to Leal and told him to quickly get Wei Yi as far away from this place as possible, while he himself went on the offensive against the remaining anti-humans. At this time, there were 2 battles going on. On one side, Jeanne was fighting with her 2 anti-humans, trying to win this fight. On the other hand, Michael was also fighting them in order to protect the light-bearer. He realized that this battle would probably be his last after all. Wei Yi saw this and was very surprised and asked if the 2 of them could really fight against the 4 anti-humans. Leal walked over to him and said irritably that of course they could. However, until they die, they are giving their lives to give him a chance to leave, and you can't make that sacrifice in vain. The boy and girl continued their fight. Their strength was already running low. The anti-humans had the upper hand over them. Leal, seeing this, was shocked. He didn't understand what would happen next if the best forces of the supplied army had no one to rely on. Wei Yi started breathing heavily. They kept running away, and the Barine said that it was actually all because of him. If it wasn't for him, half the people wouldn't have gotten hurt. Leal turned to the light-bearer and asked if he could do his trick again and destroy the anti-humans. Wei Yi, hearing this, was very surprised and asked if the guy really wanted him to do this. Leal said that in that case he could do anything, and ordered the guy to follow him, then ran in the other direction. Soon Michael and the girl had the anti-humans surrounding them. Jean, breathing heavily from the intense battle, asked if he was ready to continue. Suddenly she heard Balsa's voice telling her to stop resisting, to stop dwelling in illusions as she had with her mother, and to accept the true reality. Jean became even more angry. She started shouting, telling him to shut his mouth, because he was a traitor and don't even dare to say a word about her mother. The girl was sure of her words, and she said that she was ready to die on that day. But she would not go to the other world without taking him with her. Balsa, as if he hadn't heard their words, began to shout, telling them to give up, for humans were too insignificant to live in that world. And at that moment, smoke started coming out of the 4 anti-humans. They seemed to vaporize, and there was only one left. Balsa said that darkness is their final resting place. Let men all be destroyed, for they do not deserve. But at that moment, they all heard someone's voice. The boy and girl immediately looked up to see who it was. The voice said that even though people had been destroyed, that was no reason to stop striving for the light. When Michael and Jean looked to the side, they saw Wei Yi. He was in front of a set of mirrors that reflected back at him. At that moment, the guy activated his light-bearer abilities and said that they wouldn't leave it all just like that. The anti-humans looked at the guy in surprise. They didn't understand what was really going on, even started to get nervous. However, the guy wasn't doing well, so Michael and Jean irritatedly started looking at him. After all, they had hoped for his ability. Leal couldn't wait any longer either. He whispered to the boy and told him to light up, because everyone was waiting. Wei Yi didn't want to let his friends down, so he made every possible effort to shine, and something was even starting to work out. The guy was straining as hard as he could to activate his light ability, and said that there was no way they would stop their attempts to get the light back. And at this moment, Wei Yi shone himself and illuminated everything around him. However, some of the anti-humans had activated their protective shields, and the damage did not pass through on them. Wei Yi's attitude was serious. Instead of his usual eye color, there was a void there that was filled with light. He took a swing at one of the anti-humans, saying that he would destroy all the monsters. After that, it threw a punch of its own. However, the creature was quite fast, so it dodged. Leal, watching all this, was delighted. He said the guy wasn't just glowing, his fists acted as conductors of light power and hit the target. And after that, he turned to Wei Yi himself and told him to kill all those anti-humans. The boy continued his battle. And so when one of the monsters approached him, Wei Yi reacted fast enough to hit it, and he succeeded. The anti-human was unable to dodge the blow. Leal was in awe of what he saw. The boy felt as if his light had a divine origin. Celine and Balsa watched in surprise. They certainly hadn't expected it to come to this. Jean began to scrutinize the light and said that it was a rather warm glow. In fact, before all of this, when Wei Yi had just gotten to the anti-darkness fighting headquarters and Gabe was still alive, there had been many different examinations. And so, when the results of one of them came back, Gabe just couldn't believe it, because the examination revealed that the blood in his body had a mutation. Gabe even speculated that he might be the first human whose body began to adapt to life in the new age, and to counteract the darkness, he began to emit a glow. Michael scrutinized the examination results and asked in surprise what it meant to emit a glow. The man, smoking a cigar, replied that in some magical way his body was converting its own electrical impulses and turns them into highly concentrated streams of energy, like sunlight. Michael pondered his words for a moment, and afterward he interjected, "Would you say he's like a little walking sun?" Gabe replied that you could actually say that, with such energy not doing any harm to the human body. However, anti-humans living off of darkness, when confronted with this energy, instantly lose their ability to function, and therefore, when killed, they are unable to trigger the resurrection mechanism. In simple terms, once they meet this man, they disappear forever. Michael then asked why the guy was unconscious for the third day since he wasn't injured. The man replied that this is actually something they have yet to find out through research. In the meantime, they do not know the conditions under which the energy is released and the consequences of this process. However, we can assume it's the body's stress response in times of great danger to life, but there may be other reasons. Either way, they have to keep this guy safe. Gabe said he was their new hope, but then added that he was more like the new hope of the world, Wei. After a fair amount of time was riding in the car. He slept, regaining his strength, for he had lost quite a lot of it after that battle. Michael was driving. He was focused on the road to avoid an accident. After a while, the guy started to wake up. As soon as he looked around the place, he immediately asked what had happened to him. Then suddenly some electronic being said hello to him, calling him Master, and cheerfully told him he was finally awake. Wei Yi immediately finally woke up upon seeing the creature, became very frightened, and asked what the hell it was. The creature was outraged, for the boy called him names and said that his name was really Dada, and he was now his master's faithful companion. Michael looked at the creature and said that it was actually a parting gift to the guy from Leal. He also said that even though Dada is still under development, its intelligence and warning functions could be very useful to them. Wei Yi suddenly became worried. He began to look from side to side, wondering where they were now and whether the danger had passed. Dada told the master that they were currently moving away from Anwan City and heading towards the Five Pine Valley. The guy, hearing this, was very surprised. He asked, "Is this really the place old Gabe was talking about before he died?" Michael calmly explained that they were relatively safe for the moment, but that they needed to get to the Valley of the Five Pines to unravel the secret of its glow. However, he must return to headquarters and report on the latest developments. Michael said he could only escort him to this place where they were staying. The boy said he would be accompanied and protected by his sister for the rest of his journey. Wei Yi was surprised at first as there was no one with them. Then who would accompany him? However, he soon heard the rumble of a motorcycle, and when the boy looked out the window, he saw Jean. Then he remembered Mike's words about her being his sister and was even more surprised. Soon he disembarked. Wei Yi and leaving said that later they would all meet in the Valley of the Five Pines. The boy stood for a while in incomprehension as to what was going on. However, Dada was with him. Then Jean, who had parked her motorcycle, suddenly turned to him and asked, "Is he really going to stand like this as if paralyzed?" Wei Yi immediately walked over to the girl and sat down behind her. Mike's words about her being his sister had tormented him all the time. He wasn't sure if he and Michael were really brother and sister, or if maybe the guy was just calling her that. He and Jean don't just have different colored hair, they are completely different from each other. However, one thing was clear to Wei Yi. The girl was also from the rebel army, and judging from her strength, clearly not in the last roles. Jean suddenly turned to him and asked if he was going to sit like this the whole way. In fact, it was really strange. All because the guy wasn't holding the girl by the waist, as is customary on a motorcycle, but with his fingertips touching her clothes around her shoulders. He felt embarrassed because Jean had reprimanded him. Then Wei Yi turned to her and told her to stop addressing him so impolitely. The guy was about to give his name, but suddenly the girl interrupted him and said that the road ahead was bumpy, so he should hold on tight. At this moment, Jean sped up. Then the guy's hands slipped off her shoulders. He didn't know what to grab onto, so he lowered them down, holding on with only his feet. The girl glimpsed him and thought that, in fact, he was a completely ordinary boy. Even though he had superpowers, she couldn't believe that he was capable of becoming the hope of all mankind. It had been quite some time since they had started their journey. Jean stopped at the top of the mountain to take a little break. She looked at the beautiful view, and Wei Yi, from the moment they stopped, went over to a tree and started burping because he felt very bad. When the guy finally finished, Jean came over to him, handing him a bottle of water and telling him to drink it. Wei Yi first looked at her in surprise, and after that he thanked her. In fact, he could really use the water. He thinks the host's statoreceptors in the vestibule of the ear were overly irritated, and this caused temporary disturbances in the vestibular apparatus and heart rhythm, and all this resulted in a physiological reaction to an unfamiliar movement. Wei Yi didn't understand what he was talking about, so the guy stood up and angrily looked at the creature and told him to speak in human terms instead of his abstruse terms. Dada hadn't expected such a violent reaction, so he nervously replied that he was just seasick. It was then that Jean intervened in their conversation. She was actually the first time she had ever seen someone get seasick on a motorcycle. The guy was indignant. In fact, he was a little embarrassed that the girl had said that, but he said he just needed to enter more carefully and also gave his name. Jean was very surprised when she heard his name. She asked if that was really his name. Then the girl remembered Michael's words while the boy was still asleep. Her brother had told her to take care of Wei Yi because he might be their only chance to end the era of darkness. Jean moved closer to him and leaned on his elbow, saying, "Well, perhaps the future savior of the world, but for now, he's just a barfly." She warns right off the bat, the girl doesn't know how to babysit and has no intention of learning. Wei Yi, hearing those words, became indignant. He said that he wasn't actually a child and took her hands off his shoulder. But the girl calmly replied that she was actually glad to hear that, and then asked if he had already prepared to get stronger. Wei Yi was about to ask what she meant when he suddenly felt a kick, and at this moment he started to fall into the abyss. Wei Yi didn't realize what was going on. He shouted loudly because he was scared of crashing into the rocks. Then he turned around to see how far he had to fall. At this moment, he saw the branch that Wei Yi had just flown past, managed to grab onto it, and after it was a little bit to the bottom, calmly jumped down. When the guy landed, he didn't just fall, he sat up on his feet. He still didn't understand what was happening, and it made him angry. Jean, who was watching all of this from above at this time, thought that he had pretty good reaction speed and coordination. Therefore, this was something she could work with. Wei Yi began to chip himself off the ground and turned to the girl and asked if she had lost her mind. He said that in general, it is not allowed to push people off the mountain without warning. Then he wondered what she was saying about getting stronger, and at that moment, he saw a multitude of wolves with several pairs of eyes about to attack him. Wei Yi was even somehow confused. He didn't think that he would fall into the very real lair of shadow beasts. But then, after taking a closer look at the wolves, he realized that their rank was rare at most, so they weren't much of a threat. The only thing that added to the difficulty was their number, and at this point, the pack of wolves wasn't going to wait any longer. They went on the offensive against the guy who was just standing there. When one of the creatures was about to throw Wei Yi to the ground and bite down with its fangs, the guy managed to react in time and bounced away from it. The animal, seeing this, became very indignant. This made the wolf angry, and some purple smoke began to appear around him. He showed off his fangs. The wolf was very angry. Then he took out his claws and ran again to attack the poor fellow. Jean, on the other hand, was watching calmly while playing with Dada at this time. The girl thought that the movement speed was about the same as an average one-star rebel army soldier. His vigilance, on the other hand, was clearly not so good. She noticed that Wei Yi had stepped into a spider's web while trying to escape from the wolf. It was a very big spider web, and a huge mutant spider appeared next to it. Wei Yi was very frightened when he saw it because he didn't see it right away. In fact, it wasn't just the guy who was scared. Even the wolf, entangled in the web, tried to get out as soon as possible to escape from this bloodthirsty spider. Wei Yi was surprised. He couldn't understand how he could not have noticed the approach of so many giant spiders. After all, there was indeed more than one creature. A small pack of spiders was slowly approaching the guy to kill him. Wei Yi was very surprised. After all, the creature's children were shadow beasts of the leader rank. He had actually never encountered such high-ranked beasts before. However, the spiders kept coming closer and closer to him. There were several small ones and one very large one. Wei Yi at this moment thought that the girl was asking if he had prepared himself to become stronger. However, he was certainly not prepared for this. So the guy decided not to waste any more time. He immediately turned towards the forest and started running away. Wei Yi shouted for someone to help him, and the spiders sped up and ran after him. Jean had already come downstairs. She thought that he had a certain talent, and that this situation would be his first lesson. Dada suddenly turned to Miss Jean and asked if he understood correctly that he would soon have a change of master. The girl looked deep into the forest and said that in fact, if she didn't teach him a lesson now, he wouldn't be able to walk 100 kilometers through the slumbering forest of shadows even in his company. However, the creature was very surprised and asked what was so scary about this forest, because on the one hand it looked ordinary. Jean replied that there was actually nothing so terrifying about it, except for the innumerable horde of shadow beasts that thirsted for human blood. Soon the girl rescued Wei Yi because the boy couldn't do it on his own. They sat down by the fire she had made. The guy was outraged. He said he was on the edge of his seat, and if she hadn't come to his aid in time, he would have been digested inside the spiders. Jean gave him the roasted leg of a spider she had killed and told him it was his dinner. Wei wasn't very happy about this feast. He looked at the paw with disdain and asked if it had any dry rations. Then suddenly the date spoke up. He told the host that there are actually 10 times more calories and protein in the legs of these spiders than in beef, and they are very beneficial for building muscle, and the host certainly doesn't hurt. Wei Yi looked at this paw with horror and said, okay, apparently he had no choice after all. So he decided to try this exotic dish, and so when he tried it, the guy glowed with joy. He said that it was incredibly delicious and then began to shove the whole paw in order to quickly enjoy. Soon they had finished their dinner. Then the boy asked where this Valley of the 5 Pines was. Jean got to her feet. and pointed in the direction. She said, "This valley is on the other side of the slumbering forest of misery." Wei Yi, hearing this, was very surprised, but then the girl gave him an angry look and said that she was immediately warning him. In fact, that forest is a veritable paradise for beasts and a graveyard for men, and having entered there, dangers will await at every turn. Behind every tree and every stream, there will be some animal lurking that will want to rip his head off. And what to a guy might seem like a rock or the entrance to a cave might turn out to be part of the torso of a giant shadow beast. Wei Yi listened to the end of her story and asked in surprise, "Is she intimidating him on purpose?" But the girl said that there was actually even a possibility of coming across a Lord-rank beast. It was then that Dada suddenly spoke. He was terrified and said that even meeting beasts of the leader rank was a problem for the master. And as he goes deeper into the forest, he envisions the picture of Wei Yi's upcoming ordeal and can't talk about it without grabbing his head with both hands. Jean, seeing his frightened face, asked if he thought that the path to the Five Pines Valley would be easy. As long as they didn't enter inside the forest, he could still refuse. The boy asked her what she meant by that. Then the girl looked him straight in the eye and told him that he could forget about the rebel army. A soldier of the rebel army must be morally prepared, because at any moment he will have to sacrifice his life. If the guy still has illusions that this path can be traveled without jeopardizing his life, it is better for him to return home, because it will not be so. After all, it is quite normal. After all, the rebel army is not for everyone. Wei Yi, hearing these words, asked in surprise, "Does she really think that he will want to go back home?" That made him very angry. Then he said that he was actually born and raised in Anwan, at the very bottom of the river. And in order to get anything to eat, he would prowl the garbage cans where he had to compete for food with the dumpster cats. After that, he met Jue Meng, his only friend. They grew up together, hunted shadow beasts together, and even dreamed of joining a peacekeeping squad together one day. However, since his first encounter with the Anti-Man, absolutely everything has changed. First, Jue Meng sacrificed himself to save the guy, and then old Gabe died. In addition, for the authorities, he has become a rich man sentenced to liquidation, and for themselves the only hope of saving the world. Wei and concluded by saying that he was well aware of how weak he was at the moment, and if it were otherwise, he wouldn't have let either Jue Meng or old Gabe die. However, he would definitely have to avenge them. For their deaths, the men of the peacekeeping and Antiludium squad would pay with their lives, so the guy irritably asked what kind of return she could even be talking about. Even if he is not part of the rebel army, even if he has to go all the way alone, he will put an end to the eternal darkness. Wei Yi is not going to take it anymore. Jean was silent for a while. After that, she irritably asked, "Does he really think that one so special is carrying the burden of this world on his shoulders?" She also added that he should already wipe his snot and stop feeling sorry for himself and forget about any centimeters. In the era of darkness, heartaches are the privilege of the weak, and if he wants to survive, then let him forget about his feelings. In fact, human happiness is just a fairy tale from a past era. In the current era, there is only room for suffering. Perhaps happiness will appear in the next era, and many believe that Wei and has the potential to bring it closer. The girl really hopes that he will not deceive everyone's expectation, for he is the only savior. After their conversation, Wei Yi decided to lie down to rest for a while. Then he began to dream about his childhood memories of being in the forest with his best friend. The boys had eaten enough, and Wei Yi lay down on the grass to rest for a while. But suddenly he was awakened by Jue Meng, who pointed to the jar and told him to look at what he had found. There was a real shadow beetle in the jar. It was very small, but it was very beautiful, because it shimmered with different colors. Wei Yi saw this and was very happy. He said that they now had enough merit points to exchange for equipment. When the guys got older, his friend asked him what his dreams were after all, what he wanted to accomplish. Wei Yi really liked this kind of question. He said that of course he dreamed of joining the hunting group of the peacekeeping squad. Killing beasts to protect people was wonderful. Well, then suddenly another picture appeared in front of the guy. It wasn't so happy anymore. It was still his best friend. However, he suddenly cried and asked why he didn't protect him. And after that, an anti-human appeared behind Jun Meng who was going to kill him. The guy started telling his friend to run away because he was going to be gone. However, it was too late, for the creature reached out its hand and pierced Wei Yi's best friend's chest with its fire beam. The boy, seeing this, was horrified, because the death of his best friend is the most terrible for him. Since then, he often has such nightmares. Wei Yi took the dead body of his best friend and said that it shouldn't have happened. It's not true. But then, suddenly, out of his last strength, Jue Meng grabbed his sleeve and said that he possessed great strength. So why did he let this happen after all? Why didn't he activate his ability in time and save his best friend? Wei Yi hugged him. They were both upset and crying. The guy kept apologizing and apologizing, but it was too late. But suddenly, Jue Meng's body vanished somewhere. He didn't want to lose it, but a strange blue light filled the surroundings. After that, Wei Yi was addressed by some voice. He greeted the boy in his own subconscious. Wei Yi nervously started looking around. He didn't understand who was talking to him or where he was. The voice repeated to him that it was his subconscious, and he was the real Wei Yi. The guy was indignant and asked what the hell that was all about. He says he's just in a dream right now, isn't he? The voice said it was all wrong. It had summoned him in order to awaken his power. Wei Yi calmed down a little and asked if he meant his light. The voice agreed and said that light is a power given to him by nature, but he did not know how to use it. Wei Yi thought at this moment that indeed he only spewed out light in moments of critical threat, and he himself did not understand exactly how it happened. Then he wondered if this was the power that was shaping the light in his body, and asked if this voice was doing it. But he replied that he was not, because the light was in his heart. Wei Yi didn't understand what he meant, but suddenly he felt himself waking up. The guy opened his eyes and grabbed Zhan's hand, telling her not to leave. In fact, he felt really bad after his dream. The girl looked at him and asked if he was already holding onto her hand if she could take it away.